I couldn't find anything on the internet that leads me to think that an NFL team has ever had the first overall pick in the draft and the second pick. That would just be wild, right? Well, only a couple of months ago, that's what people thought you would have to have if you wanted to get Kayvon Thibodeaux and Neal on your team. And somehow the Giants managed to make this happen with the 5th and 7th pick in the draft. Now, this is because some other people rose on other teams' draft boards after the season ended. Some teams needed another position more, like a defensive back, some off-the-field narratives being painted, but either way, Giants fans have to be thrilled with getting two guys, both projected to go number 1 overall at some point, and not slipping because of an injury. So in today's video, we're going to talk about both Neal and Kayvon Thibodeaux to cover their game, look at their strengths and weaknesses, their potential, and what they're going to add to the New York Football Giants on their respective sides of the ball. But we also need to talk about the Giants team as a whole, because there's a lot of interesting choices that they've made and that they will need to make in the future. The Giants were one of the most injury-ridden teams in the league last year. They have a lot of talent, but also a lot of weaknesses they've either tried to or still yet to address. And the most obvious question mark on this team is clearly Daniel Jones. So before we get to talk about their first round picks and the rest of the team, let's quickly discuss Daniel Jones. Because an NFL team only goes as far as their quarterback goes, so it seems fitting to talk about this first. And when it comes to Jones, the only thing I always hear, give him one more year. He's had so many different offenses, not much help at offensive line. He's a good athlete and can make some nice throws, and he hasn't even played a full season yet. And this is why we're going into year 4, and there's still no answer to this question if he's the guy or not. And his 12-25 record isn't great, but on the other hand, he has a lot of excuses that are very, very legitimate. And now that they've declined his 5th-year option, this will finally be the season that the Giants are going to have to decide if he's the guy and extend him, or if it's just time to move on. So I went back and watched the games that Daniel Jones played last year and wanted to see if we could look at his game in a vacuum and see exactly what we can take away. And I promise this isn't a meme or a joke, but after watching way too many Giants games in a row on NFL Game Pass, I don't think a single play encapsulates Daniel Jones' career as much as this play does. Always seems to have it going so good, and at the least unexpected moment, tragedy strikes. And a lot of the time with Daniel Jones, it's not as much him having a good game and a bad game. It's really good and really bad in the same game. Some really impressive feats of athleticism mixed with great reads and threading it into small windows with a bigger arm than he's given credit for. Everything you can point out in a vacuum to convince someone that he can be a franchise quarterback of the future. But it seems as the game goes on, it is an inevitable countdown timer to a momentum-changing strip sack or a polarizing pick 6 to happen. And unfortunately, even if these issues begin to get ironed out, he makes it even more difficult to trust him when he hasn't been available for an entire season so far. And not to compare him to Joe Burrow, because he's obviously not on that level yet, but it's not good enough of an excuse for me to say that it's all on the offensive line. I think it's actually more obvious than you'd think that you can tell that the quarterback is unequivocally being held back by the offensive line. Joe Burrow, Deshaun Watson, and Matthew Stafford in Detroit all put up incredible numbers with bad offensive lines, and it was obvious they weren't the problem. But with Daniel Jones, the line of whose fault it is murky and blurred, and that's been the main reason for this prolonged discussion. And he might have been given too long of a leash with this excuse. And if I'm the Giants, it feels like he's the only option going into this 2022 season for sure. But unless Brian Daboll can bring out a Josh Allen level of improvement this year, I think it's more likely a season to decide if he's going to be the starter for the next couple years as they continue to build a roster necessary to be competitive in the NFC. But he might be another unimpressive season or an injury-stricken year away from them moving on from him altogether. And trust me, I get all of the excuses, but this is where I still fall with him. Because although we know their roster top to bottom isn't there quite yet to compete with the best teams in the league, they do have some very prominent pieces to build around. And I think they just got 2 more in this year's draft, so let's chat about them. Starting with Kayvon Thibodeaux, the 6'4", 255-pound defensive end is an absolute freak. He was the highest rated recruit to ever sign with Oregon, and just like a dual threat quarterback, a 3-level receiver, he can really do it all from the position. He has has a tremendous first step, exploding off the ball, has great speed and fantastic bend around the edge to get to the quarterback, and punishing tackles if they don't have a really explosive drop step or if they hesitate at all and get caught looking on the inside. But he also has really explosive power, and with his frame can put even more weight on to get right into a lineman's chest and drive him back into his own quarterback. And he does this with some very violent hands and a nice variety of moves that he likes to utilize. However, after watching some of his games back, sometimes it seems like he has in his mind what he's going to do before the snap of the ball, and he can use a really nice move, but it just might not fit the situation. I would love to start seeing him using counters, whatever the tackle tries to do, and adjust on the fly. And besides him being interested in NFTs, which is actually why a lot of people are saying he doesn't care about football enough, but the one negative we can point out his game comes in the run defense. And it's not all the time either, because he does have the strength, athleticism, and speed to do it and do it well. But against zone running teams, he has a lot of success controlling the tackle at the line. But when he gets left unblocked, he has been punished by pulling guards and tackles because he just doesn't see it coming, which is something he will need to work on very soon, as he's now going to be playing the Eagles twice a year. They run a lot of this action in their running schemes. So Kayvon, like I said, could very well have been the first pick in this draft. He has incredible raw tools, which makes his floor very high, but once the technicality of the position matches these traits, it could be very scary. But let's talk about Evan Neal before we get to the rest of the Giants team. And since we aren't going over specific plays in a film analysis in this video, I'm going to keep this shorter, but all we need to know is someone who is 6'7", 337 pounds should not be this athletic or quick on his feet. He is going to fill a major hole on this offensive line that was the obvious weakness on this Giants team last year. He can win against fast or strong defensive ends, and actually I would love to see him go against his new teammate in Thibodeaux, but he does this with really good lateral quickness and a great anchor. Now, what has really impressed me is he is very unassuming, and what I mean by this is he never assumes that the ball has been released because it's been 5+ seconds. I was impressed with how long he would stay on his blocks, and this allowed Tua, Mac Jones, and Bryce Young the ability to trust him on both sides of the line to hold on to the ball longer than normal. This relentlessness is what really stuck out on the film to me. And hopefully it will be the same for Daniel Jones, and more likely than not, I'm guessing he's going to be playing right tackle, as Andrew Thomas was one of the bright points on this Giants offensive line at left tackle. But now, let's take some time to look at the rest of this Giants roster and where we think they stand. Whereas the title of this video, they have some very prominent and impressive pieces, but also a lot of questions. And Daniel Jones has a lot of options to throw to right now. He still has Kenny Golladay, who in my opinion was harshly misused last season, but he also has Darius Slayton, Kadarius Toney, Wan'Dale Robinson, and Ricky Seals-Jones. And even though this isn't top of the league impressive, it's definitely a lot of explosiveness and size to run an offense when the quarterback has time and can break down a defense and deliver the ball. But the latter part of that statement is still probably the main concern with this team offensively, and it is the offensive line. And even though they took a huge step in the right direction with Evan Neal, as we just covered earlier in this video, there is still a lot of room for improvement. They did take Joshua Ezeudu, and I'm so sorry if I just completely botched that, in the 3rd round. And I'll be honest, I really don't know anything about him. He could be great, could be terrible. I honestly don't know. But let's get to the next biggest question mark on this team, and that has to be former number 2 overall pick, Saquon Barkley. Looking at the positive side of things first, when healthy, we cannot deny that just a few years ago, we were saying he was possibly the best running back in the league after his rookie campaign. He is elusive, explosive, and he was able to create his own yards, and when he did get good blocking, he could break out really impressive and monstrous runs that were insane highlights that would be posted on every single media outlet. But he hasn't looked like himself since his 2nd year, but in my opinion, this is just more the running back position being a dependent one more than anything, mixed in with some serious injury issues that he's had in back-to-back seasons. But don't get it twisted, he is still a very large asset to this team, but the whole question to me How much is he going to ask for when his rookie deal finishes? It is becoming very well known that paying a running back top dollar just isn't a recipe for success. So if Saquon does ask for top dollar, I don't see him being on the team much longer. But if he is willing to take a smaller pay, I think this becomes more of a Saquon decision than anything, and whether he wants to play for the Giants or go to a team that's currently making a championship run. And I think that will depend on the position the Giants are in when his contract is done, or if they decide to franchise tag him when that's going to be up. But let's switch our attention now to the defensive side of the ball before we wrap things up and put it all together. One of the biggest things to note is Brian Daboll, as the new head coach, brought in Don Martindale from the Baltimore Ravens. And I say this because it could be a completely new look defense in terms of their game plan. Martindale is extremely aggressive and doesn't buy into the fact that you just should sit back and let the offense make a mistake. He is all about forcing them to make mistakes. And this has led him to having some of the best defenses in the league in his 15 years in the NFL. Now, this is interesting because when you have the goods to back it up, it can be one of the most terrifying defense to try and adjust to. But if he's sending in blitzes and they're being picked up and the secondary isn't holding up on the back end, this could lead to some very short series if a speedster on the other team catches the ball in the open field. So, what do we think is going to happen? Well, last year they were top half in the league in passing yards allowed, but they were bottom half in the league in rushing yards allowed. And losing their Pro Bowl cornerback in James Bradbury to a division rival, I cannot say is much of a positive, but they still have some staple pieces on the defense. But I would say they're in need of a lot more depth, and unfortunately but true, you can't always depend on every player staying healthy, which becomes even more concerning when you're semi-thin as it is. And Don Martindale knows this all too well, as he went from coaching arguably the best secondary in the league to a practice squad secondary with the Ravens last year because of all the injuries. I think Leonard Williams, Dexter Lawrence, and Kayvon Thibodeaux seem to be the new staples on the defensive line. Adoree Jackson and Xavier McKinney are some of the highlights on the back end, but outside of these guys, they are in really desperate need of another corner, and in today's NFL, multiple safeties, corner, and nickel corners are essential to keep up with all the weapons that other teams are loading up on. But the linebacking core is probably going to be the most glaring weakness on this team, who will be essential in Martindale's defense, because someone like Patrick Queen, who can fire off on the snap of the blitz or play man coverage on the running back coming out of the backfield, I think is going to be someone that they're going to look to target in future drafts or in the offseason, because they really need this flexibility of being able to play in space, because they are going to be sending so much pressure and trying to force the other quarterback to make a mistake. So I think the defense should be okay, and I say this in terms of I think they're going to be around average, but not because they have a bunch of average players. I think they have some really good, solid players and some positions that are just flat out weaknesses. And I think the Giants are going to be much better of a spot offensively than they were last year. They added some new pieces that are making efforts on the offensive line. So many players on that side of the ball, especially at the skilled positions, were hurt last season. So I expect them to be a lot more impressive in the 2022 season. It is definitely going to be a very interesting season for the Giants. And like I mentioned earlier, they will definitely have their answer at the quarterback position by the conclusion of this season. But to wrap things up, even the most die-hard Giants fans would probably acknowledge that they're not in a place right now to compete for a Lombardi this season, but they are looking this season for improvement, development, hoping that they found their coaches of the future, and looking to make more moves in the draft and offseason in the upcoming years to be back in the picture where they have been for so long and where they think they deserve to be. But that's what I think. Let me know what you guys think. Make sure to like this video if you like videos like these. Make sure to comment down below what you think about the Giants, and make sure to subscribe if you enjoy daily sports content. Thank you guys so much all for watching. Thank you so much for checking out the channel, and as always, I will see you all tomorrow. Peace!